It has been a while since I have talked about a video game. In the last several months, I was more attracted to talk about movies and TV series, and the video game part of my passion and hobby was left alone, to dust over time. Even though I still consider myself to be a film student, and I want to learn everything about movies and TV series in order to polish and improve my skills to create my own career and to tell my own stories, I consider video games an equal part of the same world of storytelling and visual captivation, just like the movies, the books, the theater. The only difference is, the person who wants to discover that experience has to interact in a certain way in order to find out the story, rather than sitting in a chair to watch or read something captivating. Anyway, in the last couple of months, thanks to the holiday season, I wanted to relax a bit and play something. I wanted to play something from a favorite series, something familiar, but also something unknown to me. So I decided to go back to the Assassin's Creed series. I wanted to play a bit in a historical environment. However, the new video games are quite huge and take a lot of time to explore and play through them. Not to mention that some of them are a bit, well, quite bad story-wise. Not all of them, but some of them are bad. Maybe I will play those when I have a little more time or when I might want to talk about them. Still, I wanted to play something unknown, something old school, something short and a bit challenging. Assassin's Creed Altair's Chronicles is a 2008 video game released on Nintendo DS. It is the first Assassin's Creed spin-off game and the first spin-off installment of the franchise. The story of the game is made to be a prequel of the original Assassin's Creed game and allows the player to play once more as Altair, in a quest to discover a powerful artifact called the Chalice, an artifact that is in control of the Templars and that has to be retrieved from their hands. The game was later ported on iOS and Android systems, with enhanced graphics and gameplay adapted to those platforms, but unfortunately, those versions were taken down from the store back in 2013, so only the DS version remained to this day to be experienced by a possible fan or a curious gamer. I wanted to play this game for a long time. I didn't have a chance mostly due to the platform limitations. Now, having the chance to play it, I have to say it feels similar yet different. From the point of view of the story, the game is set 1 year before the events of Assassin's Creed 1. There are some contradictions from what I have seen with the main game. However, the way it is made, you might say that it is a standalone story, rather than a prequel. I will explain this affirmation later. Gameplay-wise, however, I truly felt similarities with games that I played a long time ago. Not only Prince of Persia games, a series of games that Assassin's Creed is considered to be its successor, but also Assassin's Creed games released later, more exactly the Assassin's Creed Chronicles trilogy. Playing the game and seeing all those familiar things, I started to think of this game as a blueprint to what came next, just like the original game, but also as a bridge between an older series and this one. For someone who might have not played another Assassin's Creed game, the ones that are spin-offs, this game might be unpolished, it might look weird, it might be a very downgraded version for a less impressive console, but if you have played other games and you go back to play this one specifically, it is like replaying something that you knew, something that you played before, even though you never touched or seen this game until in this moment. The story of the game is pretty easy to follow. As a matter of fact, compared with the main game, the story is way too simple. Altair is coming back from a mission only to find the city of Alep attacked by Templars. Right after that, Altair receives a mission from Al-Mualim to find the chalice and retrieve it for the assassins. Going through cities like Jerusalem, Damascus, Tyre and Accra, and facing a rogue faction of the assassins, Altair discovers the chalice being Ada, a girl from Altair's past whom he had feelings for. Altair is fighting with the Basilisk, the leader of the Templars, in order to protect and save Ada, but unfortunately, in the end, Ada is taken by the Templars, while Altair swears to find them and rescue her. The story is pretty straightforward. It does not introduce the player into the world of the game, just like the original game or any other game. It just tells you about the context, the location, the character, and then lets the player start the game and find out what is happening. The developers created the story in such a way that they assumed the player previously played Assassin's Creed. If this is the first game that you might play in the series, you might be adrift for a couple of minutes. You wouldn't understand the motivation of the character and the context of the conflict. Still, they succeeded to captivate the elements of the main game in a way that truly feels it is an Assassin's Creed game. From time to time, Altair has to complete certain tasks that might be considered side quests in a bigger game, but in this one, they are part of the story. But this is not the issue. My only problem with the story of the game, however, is that it feels rushed. The game introduces you instantly into the game, and it ends in a way that it might have something more to tell the player. Just, it cannot do it because there is not enough time. From a creative point of view, I truly appreciate the effort of the developers. They tried to give you a story that might be added to the bigger picture of the series, and in a way, they did, but the story works only if you know the main game. If I think about it, the story might be good also for a player who doesn't know the series. Who am I kidding? It is impossible even if you take the game as a simple platformer with certain puzzles and combat moments. The game introduces you into the story right away, and you might take it as a mystery, and in time you get used to the story and you start to understand the context, but let's face it, I do not think someone would play this game as an opening gate towards a series. The game was made for the fans of the Assassin's Creed game, and this can be understood from the first moments you open the game and start to play it. If you do not know the original game, you will be confused and lost into the context. Gameplay-wise, however, I think this is where Altair's Chronicles truly stands out somewhat as a game. I mean, leaving aside what was made after Assassin's Creed 1 in the main series, Altair's Chronicles succeeding in putting ideas and mechanics into the game in a way that it feels unique. The main idea of using parkour as a method of movement throughout the cities is kept in the game, and yes, it is quite limited. Being a Nintendo DS game, the console limitations made the developers adapt this thing in a way that might remind you of the original Prince of Persia series, the ones made by Brandenburg Games. The 2.5D environment gives the player this sensation of a larger world, and allowing the player to move from the northern side to the southern side of any location, it gives that 3D sensation that the original game had, with a big location in a mission that the player needs to know in order to complete the game. The platform parts of the level are quite challenging and quite annoying sometimes, due to the camera's position or the movement, but with a little patience, the player can complete the puzzle. What was interesting about the game were the weapons that can be used by Altair. Besides the classical hidden blade and sword, Altair can now use a crossbow, which is a bit weird thinking back about the first game, when the developers cut the crossbow idea from the original game in order to be more historically accurate, as they said back then. Other weapons in the game, as throwables, besides the classic knives, Altair can now use smoke or explosive bombs that could give an advantage in combat. The movement has an added element, a grappling hook that allows Altair to swing from one platform to another, which makes the movement more dynamic. Also, it can be used in combat to get the enemies closer to you. From a lore perspective, it can be weird to see Altair use all those weapons while in the first game he has a limited type of gadgets, but you might think that those tools were either used by Altair in a certain context depending on the mission, or they were not used in the first game because Altair was made once more an apprentice and the less experienced assassins cannot use those type of weapons due to their rank. I don't know exactly, maybe it is an explanation like this somewhere, probably. However, the movement is a bit stiff, the combat is quite basic, even though you can make attack combinations to parry enemy attacks or create combinations to defeat them. And sometimes the button prompts do not work unless you are properly positioned near the objects, but if you might take in consideration this is a 17-year-old game for a console that was made to be simple with touchpad mechanics and a certain type of gameplay, I think that if you want to play the game, you might have to charge yourself with a little patience to have a chance to complete it. The game also presents an upgrade mechanic in which the player can level up their health bar and the sword using the blue orbs that can be collected throughout the game. It is a limited mechanic, however, because you have to collect all the orbs in order to max out Altair, and if you missed some of the orbs, the upgrades won't be fully completed. Unfortunately, the upgrades are not carried over on your profile, just on the levels. You cannot go back to replay a previous level and have all the upgrades again. You have to play each level carefully in order to get all of them. The viewpoint mechanic is not presented at all in the game, which is understandable due to the console's mechanics, but also due to the way the game focuses more on the parkour side of things with challenging platforms and puzzles. Overall, it can be felt that the developers were limited by the console. However, seeing how the stealing minigames or the interrogation minigames or the use of the microphone of the DS to clean the dust from certain chests were made to use the console's attributes and feel natural for the game's gameplay, I can say that the developers used those limitations in a way to make the game feel okay. It is not a great game, and I cannot say that it's a good game, but one way or another I can appreciate the way they tried to present the series in another style of gameplay. You might say that Altair's Chronicles is a downgraded version of the main game regarding the gameplay and the world presentation, which might be seen as a good idea, at least for a console like Nintendo DS. I do not find this as a problem. After all, I consider this game to be a challenge to explore new ways of the main gameplay mechanic. Seeing how most of the Assassin's Creed games are almost the same with a certain gimmick differentiating the games from one another, a simpler, more direct and cleaner type of gameplay, it can be seen as a breath of fresh air, but as it is in all the cases, that depends on the player's own preference regarding video games. There is something quite intriguing to me, and that is the way this game is one of the forgotten games of the series. I understand that this is the first spin-off game and it was made on a console that, yes, it might be a bit weird for the majority of the gamers, and to the ones that are not accustomed to its mechanical features, but leaving the real-life element aside, the game is forgotten even by the series itself. I tend to believe that being their first spin-off installment, the creators didn't know exactly how to connect the game to the main branch of the franchise. As I said at the beginning of the video, the game throws you instantly into the story, already assuming the player has played Assassin's Creed 1. The story is set 1 year before the main game, but there are some inconsistencies regarding the two titles. The main inconsistency is that the assassin's base is Alep instead of Masyaf. Initially I thought to be just a temporary household, seeing how the story was presented, but after a little research, apparently the assassin's base was initially Alep, and after the events of Altair's Chronicles, the base was moved to Masyaf. This contradicts a bit the events of the Secret Crusade novel, which was released back in 2011, in which the base was always Masyaf, but I think it is up for debate. Probably Alep was a temporary base, or they moved for a time there to complete certain missions. Who knows, but seeing how the novel totally avoids relating the events of Altair's Chronicles, this is totally up for debate and speculation. Another thing that takes me a step back is the ending of the story. The game ends with Altair failing to save Ada and vowing to find her and save her, but we do not see the outcome of this story. The only direct connection between Altair's Chronicles and Assassin's Creed 1 are some lines of dialogue from a quest giver in Damascus, in Memory Block 4, that mentions Ada and her disappearance, and a bit the events that occurred in Alep, but other than that, nothing. The player does not give any more information regarding this adventure until in the main sequel of the series, Assassin's Creed 2. For those who might explore every bit of text line from a game, Ada is mentioned by Altair in his codex, confirming the fact that she died right after the events of Altair's Chronicles. Altair went in a quest of vengeance and eliminated every man who had something to do with her death, putting him on a dark path, and changing him to be more ruthless in his quest, in a way connecting this thing with his attitude from the beginning of the first game, when he didn't care for anything but the mission. Altair's feelings for Ada and his shattered dreams to settle to a normal life with her made him who he was at the beginning of Assassin's Creed 1. This is a new and interesting take on his character evolution, to be honest. It wasn't just arrogance and superiority in Altair that made him fall down so bad that he had to relearn Creed's ways once more. It was grief, a thing that could change a person quite radically. And the quest giver's mention of Ada might be the fact that most of the assassins knew of Ada but they didn't know of her fate, makes the whole context more personal to Altair. This thing adds a new level of understanding regarding Altair, it makes him more human than before. I just wanted to see this outcome honestly at the end of Altair's Chronicles, rather than to explore 3 different games to find a single piece of information regarding a character. This is a big downgrade to me. I like and I understand the small steps the creators took to evolve their franchise, but honestly, just keep the stories whole and completed. No wonder people tend to forget this game. Its story is not finished properly, and even other main elements of the franchise barely mention it, in a way that it could be a chit chat or just a text note in the information tab of another game. It is sad if you think about it. There are other smaller things that do not fit well with the main game, like the presentation of Al-Mualim, much younger in this game than in the first one, but probably you can add this to the different styles of design chosen by the developers. I already mentioned the fact that Altair is using certain weapons that are not present in the original game, but in Altair's Chronicles, he is using them regularly. I do not think this is a problem of continuity or not, but if you play the games back to back, yes, it might be of question mark there. In my head canon, as people would say, I think that Altair is using different tools depending on the mission, which might be logical, but as I said earlier, until a clear explanation is given by the creators of the franchise, anything can be up to debate. There is still one thing that is interesting to the way the game is presented, however, that differentiates the concept of Altair's Chronicles from the main game: the Animus. The hub of the game and its interface gives the idea that what the player experiences is a simulation of the Animus, just like in the main game, but everything that it might be connected to modern times is cut out. The player jumps directly into the story. It's like the game immerses the player in Desmond's role or someone's role that explores Altair's experiences. I think that this decision is okay for this type of game because it does not complicate the story of the game that much, it keeps it straightforward. But as an opposite element with all those elements that make the game feel rushed, it also gives a sensation of a scrapped idea that was left on the cutting floor. Maybe I am thinking it too much on this concept, and possibly it is a benefit this game is made like this. But I cannot think to the fact the game feels like it is a fast-told story. Focusing the game on Altair's journey rather than add another storyline that won't go anywhere, yeah, I think it is a good idea. Altair's Chronicles is a game that could be seen as the simplest and basic game of the series. More basic than the first game. It is not that memorable regarding the story or the mechanics, only by the way it is made and because of the main character. Still, with all those flaws, I cannot see how small parts of it were used later in the development of the series. This idea of a corrupt branch of the Assassins was used a bit later in games such as Assassin's Creed Rogue or Unity, in which a character starts to become more independent of the Creed and starts to betray the Creed for various reasons. But this idea of corruption, of betraying the Creed for money at this level, I do not think I saw it again in the series. The visual style of 2.5D platformer game that reminds a lot of the original Prince of Persia games, the ones that were made before Ubisoft got the rights of the franchise, was later used for the Chronicles trilogy, but more polished and more smoothed than in Altair's Chronicles. And the use of weapons like the grappling hook, bombs and crossbow could be considered just a test in this game, for what it came next as main mechanics later in the series. And sorry, but I cannot avoid saying this. I laughed a bit when I saw the snakes being present as enemies so early into the franchise. It gave me a bit of PTSD from Assassin's Creed Origins, when in every single jar, in every single spot in the desert, there was a snake that was ready to attack you. I laughed a bit seeing this thing in this game. There is also a stealth part of the story in which Altair has to disguise himself in order to go into an enemy camp, a thing that made me to think to the Ezio trilogy that has a moment of disguise in every single game. For so many reasons, Altair's Chronicles shares the same fate as Assassin's Creed 1. Both of them could be considered unpolished games, however, both of them are, in a way, a main blueprint for something that came next in the series. I am a nerdy person when it comes to reusing a mechanic or to pay homage to a certain element of the series from the past. Each person can see those games in any way they like, but to me, those two games are like the foundation to what came next. With all the controversies of the series from today and the way they evolved along the years, not only in the main mechanics of the game and the way the developers present the world, but also the way they started to tell their stories and discover new eras from history into their lore, I think it is nice to go back, from time to time to the roots of the franchise. Maybe someone will see and appreciate how simple and clean those games were at the beginning of the series, how the simplest methods of gameplay made the experience to be wholesome, and even though it was glitchy and unpolished, how the games had a certain personality that made them unique and, although not quite memorable but for the ones who played them, but they were interesting one way or another. In the last few years I heard for numerous times the term abandonware. Games that are lost to time due to the console being too old, or licenses lost, or closed servers, or taking them down from a digital store. Unfortunately for me, I truly wanted to play the mobile version of Altair's Chronicles to see the differences between the versions mostly, but to experience the game as best as I could. I heard it was the superior version, with enhanced graphics, voice acting, and gameplay adapted to the mobile consoles. But the version was taken down from the stores 12 years ago. All I had to do was to play the DS version, which is not that bad, but also it is not that good either. It allowed me to play through this chapter of Altair's story and made me explore a bit the original roots of the series in another way, but something inside me kinda wanted to see how the game was on mobile. There are YouTube videos out there that are walkthroughs to that version, but there is something else. There is another feeling when you play directly that version compared to watching a video of someone playing a game. I hope that somehow, someday, someone will make it possible to access old video games more easily and have access to different old consoles to play those games, not only through second-hand games or hand-me-down consoles that could be bought off the internet. There is a shame in my opinion that this thing is happening, but this is a bigger discussion that will open so many Pandora's boxes to the gaming industry in ways that could change it drastically. Coming back to the main idea of this video, Altair's Chronicles is one of those games that can be easily passed by someone who might want to explore the Assassin's Creed series. It is one of the obscure titles. However, the game has a certain flair of remembering it, mostly due to its presentation or graphic style, or just because it is one of the few Nintendo DS games of the series. But is it worth playing? Well, maybe, but only if you are a fan of the main series, if you wanna explore some side content that you might not know of. It does not bring something worthwhile to the normal experience of the series, but probably it is worth a shot. It is indeed a new way of gameplay compared with the main titles, and it is quite unique. If you might wanna play this game totally blind, not knowing anything about the main franchise, although, let's face it, it is quite difficult since there are almost 20 years of video games out there, it might be a weird game, but there is a game that you start to understand easily while you discover its puzzles and platforming levels. It is a nice throwback to a style of video games that today might be considered old school or too indie, but it depends on the player. If you might like them, and you might wanna try the game just for the challenge, or just because it is connected to the Assassin's Creed series, it is up to you. It is a game that I might replay in another version, probably, if I have the chance, but it was a new experience to try and play it. It has its charm in its own way, after all.